Welcome to Pratidhwani, where we try to humanize science. I'm your host, GV Pawan Kumar. It's my delight and pleasure to welcome Professor Bejoy Thomas on this particular episode of Pratidhwani. Now, Bejoy is an associate professor in the Humanities and Social Sciences section at Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, Pune. And he has vast interdisciplinary interest and has been working on various interesting questions related to development and water management. In recent times, he actually has focused on this water management and developmental issues, which actually has very broad implications on the society. And he also has very deep interest in environmental and sustainability development aspects and related to climate science. He also has a very diverse and very deep training in various interesting aspects related to water. This is also kind of reflected in his experience as postdoctoral fellow and research fellow prior to actually joining A3, which is Ashoka Trust, where he spent a significant time. And then later on, he moved to Indian Institute of Science Education and Research. He has been very active in also bringing up very interesting thoughts by writing very interesting articles. You will, of course, find them all in the description and the references. With this brief introduction, I welcome Vijay to Pratidwani.
Thank you, Pawan. It's a pleasure being on your podcast.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So, Vijay, we will get started with your origins. What really actually got you into the framework of these kind of interesting questions in social sciences? I know that you have a background in economics, but we'll go to that later. But I want the origins to be first visited. Yeah, please tell us a little bit about that.
So I am originally from Kerala, from the town of Kottayam in Kerala. And I think since I was 5 years old and until my BA, so when I was 20 years old, I've been in Kottayam itself. So I'm the only child of my parents. So both of them were working. So I remember being put in a crush at a very young age. And I was the youngest person in that child in that crush. So the parents would come and pick me up in the evening, and so that's how my childhood has been. So it's pretty much not a very eventful childhood, as I would say. Middle class or salaried class uh, upbringing. And so something which I remember about my school days is that I've not been a very active person physically. Part of it is also because I had an asthmatic attack, which used to happen once in 3 months or so. So which meant that my parents were also somewhat protective of me. So which also was in a way a boon because I could spend a lot of time reading. And so when I was in my teens, we in the same town we moved to a different location, and so this particular house was very close to one of the largest libraries, perhaps in Kerala, and I could just access books and just keep reading. And occasionally, I would go out and play with my friends and so on. But most of my time I would spend by myself because no siblings, parents working, and unlike the youngsters of the current days, there are no distractions like internet or whatever. So books are the best friends, and that's how my childhood, as I remember it. So in terms of books, initially it began with fiction and so on, but then in my early teens itself, I graduated to a bit more heavy, I mean, so-called heavy kind of reading. So I remember reading Russell when I was in my high school. So that was my introduction to philosophy, broadly speaking. So then I started also reading a bit of Indian politics and history. So I would have a chat with my father about current political events and so on. So this is how I remember my childhood. And as a student, I've been a pretty good student. I mean, not the topper in the class, but obviously in the the top 5 or 6 or whatever. So that's how my high school has been. And So the turning point in terms of my decision as far as my academics actually happened, after my 12th. And there is also a bit of history to that, because if you are a smart student in the early 90s, after high school, the option that you have is either go for medicine or go for engineering. And my parents were also thinking in similar lines because those are the safe bets. Otherwise, the rest of the things probably, people might want to go for civil service. So otherwise, nobody would actually think in terms of research or education or such career. But from my school days onwards, I had some thinking that I would at some point become a teacher or somewhere in academia. So this was my thinking. At that time, it necessarily didn't have a orientation like research or PhD because you also evolve over time as a individual. So probably, if I can actually think in terms of my ambitions and evolution as a teacher. So during school days, I thought I would become a school teacher. So when I moved into my college, I mean, I saw that, oh, these teachers are much more, uh, they have much more deeper understanding of the subject area that they talk about, and they talk about general issues more than your school teachers. And I had very inspiring teachers in college. I mean, one of them, Professor Matthew Gideon, who actually inspired me to go deep into economics and political economy. So such teachers really inspired me. And then I thought, oh, there is a scholarly aspect also to academia. So which means you go for a PhD and so on. So which also means that I create my own knowledge.
Mm.
What I was probably reading during my school days from books, maybe I could also create knowledge and do such put my own perspectives out for people to read and comment.
Wonderful.
So then once I graduated from my college, when went to university, I saw that there is another dimension there. So people are more focused on research. So instead of teaching, I mean, you go deeper into a particular area, study that more, and so on. And when I went abroad after for my PhD, I mean, doing my master's and after my PhD, I thought, I mean, it's the same kind of environment, but then it's a bit more. In depth, and the level at which they were exploring issues were a lot different than what you would see in India. So over time, the thinking in terms of where I want to go and what I want to become actually evolved. So going back to my school time, so after my 10th, since I scored really high marks, my parents obviously wanted me to take sciences. But during school, I really hated chemistry and biology. So so in Kerala we had there were three options. You could go to what is called the first group, which would mean you take physics, chemistry, and maths. The second group is you take physics, chemistry, and biology. And the third group is mostly the arts and humanities group, which would also have some, introduction to probably geography, philosophy, and such disciplines. Well, there was also a fourth group, which was on commerce and related disciplines. So since I didn't like biology at all, I opted for the first group. But then the thing is, I didn't want to go for sciences in the first place. My inclination was to go for what is called the third group, where you have more social sciences and
Mm.
philosophy and so on. Because at some point I thought philosophy is actually the foundation of many things, and I wanted to become a philosopher. So later on, although I mean, when actually the rubber hits the road, you realize that bake bread. So my thinking also changed, after a couple of years. And although I resisted really, hard, my parents and everybody around us pushed me into sciences. So in fact, those 2 years were not really great for me.
Mm.
Although I was still a very smart student and good student, really didn't pay much attention to my academics during those 2 years. But the two things which I gained from those 2 years is one is since I chose maths, economics requires quite a bit of math, especially calculus and treatment of data, which would come later on. So that was something which was a blessing in disguise since I chose the first group. Then I liked to some extent physics, although the way it was taught during our school and college would be very exam oriented. Because unlike, say, I mean, this is my view, probably you can correct me. So unlike say biology and chemistry, physics and math has some philosophy behind it because it has some abstraction and zooming out and thinking in terms of abstract terms behind it. Probably that's the reason why I like them. But at that point, I was in no mood to enjoy physics or math. I mean, I just made sure that I score the basic minimum, and then hope that my parents realize that this is not what I really like. Eventually, they realized that, and after my 12th, I was given a free choice to take whatever option which I want. So then, coming to economics is also a bit of an accident because I mean, like I told you, I wanted to go into philosophy. But after my 12th, I was also thinking, I mean, what exactly should I be doing? And then I happened to come across a book during my holidays. So that is after my 12th and then waiting for my admission to the BA program. So I happened to come across a book. If I remember correctly, it was from a sister of one of my friends, and this was a book in economics. So in fact, it was a book in what is called history of economic thought. So this is an area which is now not really taught much in many universities, but during our period it was taught in many universities. The reason why it is not really taught now is that there is much less emphasis on history and how ideas in economics evolved, because the emphasis is mostly on mathematical modeling, basic concepts, and then empirical applications. So it doesn't go too much into how these things actually evolved. But the book actually caught my attention because it had many things which I was looking for. It had math to the extent that I could understand. So it had all figures and graphs and all those illustrations which I really liked, because at some point when you illustrate your theories and arguments, you do them through graphical representation. That I liked. In addition to that, most surprisingly, it also had a lot of history and philosophy and politics in it. So I thought probably this economics is a very fantastic discipline and fascinating field, because it basically has everything that I'm looking for. It actually gives me philosophy. It probably also would help me bake my bread. So
Mm.
that's how I got into economics for my BA. So again, I mean, I was not very sure as to what this field was. And economics is not a subject which many people opt, in India at the BA level. Only people who are really interested in the subject, or people who are preparing for civil service or such exams, are the ones who actually opt for that. Otherwise, you have a very average class or average batchmates. But during my BA period, I was mentored by Professor Matthew Kurian, who is currently with the K.N. Raj Center for Economics in Mahatma Gandhi University. So he's close to 8 years old, and he's an emeritus professor there. So he has been an excellent mentor. I mean, he was unlike a traditional economist. He would actually make people think, and then he would also bring in that historical and political economic aspects into debate. And I remember we used to have long debates about the situation around us. So this was also the time when India was also undergoing a lot of changes in terms of its economy. So the 1990s, which was a tumultuous period as far as Indian economy is concerned, and also we had coalition governments, and it was politically
Mm.
also it was really interesting. So I used to, I mean, at the very dry and empirical level, I used to analyze budget and vote on account every time it happens for 2 3 years. And I used to also write occasionally some analysis in some local magazines and so on. But otherwise, I mean, I got really, fascinated by economics, and especially the field of political economy and development economics. So this is a field which is very close to what most of us actually do in terms of, more applied field of economics.
Economics, yeah.
So this is where I ended my BA. So the natural progression was to go into maybe development economics for my master's. So in fact, what I did was after my bachelor's, my BA, so I wrote, either the entrance or the admission test for many institutes. University of Hyderabad, JNU, Pondicherry University. I mean, all the major institutions at that time, and also in Kerala, John Mathai Center in Calicut University had a very good economics department, and Kerala University also had. So in fact, I got into all of these departments. So they invited me for the master's program. But at that time, I again had some kind of a rethink. I thought probably, some kind of an applied orientation, application would actually give me much more strength, especially if I were to look for a job and not really pursue PhD immediately. So this was my thinking at that point. So I, again deviated or shifted tracks a bit. So instead of going for development economics or political economy or a standard economics master's program, I chose an applied economics program, which is at Cochin University of Science and Technology. And in a way, that was a turning point in my life too. Although I didn't, eventually, what happened is that at the end of 2 years, I came back to development economics because I realized that my heart is actually in development economics and not really in applied fields or business economics. So in fact, when I got out of my master's, the program itself changed its name. It was originally MA in applied economics, but since many of my batchmates and seniors felt that business economics would actually be more trendy in the job market, and since they found that our program is really no different in terms of its content, with between business economics programs offered elsewhere. The university changed the name to Master of Business Economics. So although that is not a label which I would want to carry, I wanted to carry. So I graduated as a Master of Business Economics. But what happened is that during that 2 years, I mean, although I was supposed to finish my master's in 2 years, it actually took 2.5 years. In 2 years, I realized that, I mean, my heart is in development, but I also got these empirical skills and so on from the training there. But by the end of the third semester, I got a fellowship to spend a semester in Tilburg University in the Netherlands. And so the idea was that I would go there and do my master's dissertation. And I had a proposal roughly in the area of development economics. The project basically aimed to look at how equity and efficiency, I mean, in theory, there is a trade-off between equity and efficiency. For instance, there used to be theories or arguments saying that if a country wants to pursue economic growth, it can only come at the expense of equal distribution in the first few years, and after that, probably equity might also can happen in the medium run and in the long run. But in the short run, if you are aiming for economic growth, you have to compromise on equity. So there is an equity efficiency trade-off which is mentioned in literature, and I thought I would actually work on that for my master's dissertation. And so typically what economists do is economists work with large data. They have these theories just like the one which I just mentioned, or they have models which they create based on their own hypothesis. And then they test those theories or models based on empirical data. So in my master's work, I took the case of two sub-Saharan African countries and two Latin American countries, I mean, Mexico, Chile, and two sub-Saharan African countries, and try to see whether this equity and efficiency trade-off actually works historically in their case. So for instance, economists measure equity using a indicator called Gini coefficient. So it has a value between 0 and 1. Higher the value, the country is more unequal. And, this is, although it has the, image of a technical term, if you just search in World Bank or any other database, you would easily come across Gini coefficient, just like GDP, getting reported every year or, every 2-3 years. So this was what my master's dissertation in. So since I spent the 6 months in Tilburg, when I came back, I had to spend an additional one semester in Cochin to finish my master's. So my master's actually took 2.5 years to finish and not two. Although initially the Indian university actually, in principle, agreed that you go to take a few courses as well, and when you come back, you will get that credits transferred to India. But that eventually didn't happen because the things were not really flexible those days as it is now. So this is how I finally finished my master's. So probably that's a good point. Probably
Yeah,
pause and
yeah.
then.
Yeah, yeah. In
Your
fact, this
reflection.
is wonderful. There are so many things to actually, unbox in this particular trajectory, what you've taken. Consistently, one can see that there is some very interesting connection to philosophy, because I can see that even now the work what you do has, in a broader sense, connected to philosophy. Of course, there is actually economics and development and other things, but there is an underlying philosophy behind all these aspects and the work what you do. And you also measured that you mentioned that that you got exposed to Russell at a very young age. It's actually very interesting that that particular way of thinking at such a young age also gives you a very different perspective, right? Because you would end up actually thinking in a different way altogether. Were there also any specific people apart from a few whom you mentioned who also encouraged you to read more books and have some kind of a slightly more broader perspective? Because the questions what you ask actually have very broad and kind of important implications to the society, and yet you are anchored in quantitative social science kind of research. This is a very kind of interesting balance to strike, because if you take natural sciences, many a times the implication on society is perceived, and it's not direct. It actually has a roundabout way. Whereas if you take humanities per se, there of course the implications are direct, but sometimes it becomes a little bit more qualitative. But in this particular case, you have been able to bring these two things together. And given that you have also had mathematics as one of the subjects which you studied, would have surely had some kind of positive effect. So, give us an overview of that aspect, Vijay. Any specific people, anecdotes, or any kind of experiences, exposures you got while growing up? It can be including your own family and other revenues.
So probably my early influence must have been my father. Even now,
Hmm.
he's a strong influence on me. So we would discuss a lot of things because, like I said, I don't have any siblings, and so especially when I had this asthmatic attack, I had to be confined to home,
Hmm.
and I had an easy access to a huge library as well. So this was my formative years. So I think the choice of getting into such a mode, thinking, reflecting, discussing, reading, was quite natural, and there was no real influence in terms of individuals there. But obviously, like I said, when I came to my undergrad level, BA level, I mean, Professor Matthew Green was my, major influence. So he actually, broadened my vision and also made it sure that I anchor in economics, but in a manner that is more relevant and close to societal and real concerns of people. So in fact, this is interesting because like I said, I mean, in economics, people don't really need to work in the field. I mean, they work almost like physicists
Hmm.
or empirical, people. So although they work with data and they talk about social problems, it's very rare that a standard economist would actually go into the field and work.
But you
So
did, right? But you did actually. You
yeah,
went into the
so
field.
that was the next turning point in my career. So what
Mm.
happened is that after my masters, I was recruited for a project in the same institute where I did my master's dissertation. So the project actually required, so it had a complicated administrative structure, but it was a very fascinating project too. So the project had, the basic question of the project was to see whether participation in self-help groups and microfinance group actually helps people improve their living standards. So this was the applied question, and so there was my bosses sitting in the Netherlands. So then I was a local anchor in Cochin University, where the administrative things in India would be done. So then I had a host which would actually take me to the field, an NGO which is based in Kutanad region in Kerala. So in
Mm.
fact, this region is also somewhat really interesting in terms of its ecology and social history. So for most people who work in natural sciences, in ecology and environmental sciences, this region is called Vembanad ecosystem or Vembanad Lake ecosystem. because they
You have a very nice picture on the Twitter. I have actually kind of included it in the reference.
So, those people look at the aquatic biodiversity and also the natural environment and water quality and such things in the region. And it's also a Ramsar wetland, so that has international significance as well. But even when I was, recruited for this project and I was doing field work there, I was not really aware of the ecological issues or water or anything of that sort. I was a straightforward economist.
Mm,
So I went to the field having some bit of social history in my mind because Kutanad is also a hotbed of communist movement and social
mm,
reform movements in Kerala. So it has a long history of laborers securing their rights and so on. So it's quite well known in terms of that aspect in Kerala politics and also economic history. So for a social scientist, a lot has been written historically and also in terms of data, in terms of how the lot of laborers and also small landholders actually improved over time in this region. So, although I mean I knew this history and background, this was not my primary focus again. So the idea was to apply some of the standard what is called farm household models to the case of Kutanad by selecting longitudinal data. So we had a plan to collect data at period one. So then after 6 months and again after 6 months from the same set of households.
mhm,
So this is a standard technique which is used in field-based development economics. You track the same households over time with the same variables and then try to see whether there is an improvement in their condition based on the object that is driving your research question or the object that is of interest for you. So this was my first encounter as a researcher in the field. And this was extremely eye-opening. So I had some 10, 20 master students who were not very younger than me because I was also, almost the same age as them. So they were helping me out in the field in collecting the data. So in fact, the questionnaires were modeled in terms of what the National Sample Survey Organization collects. So it's a long questionnaire which has some 40, 50, 60 pages. So which would cover each and every aspect of your consumption patterns and demographic information and so on. You might have to actually go multiple rounds, visit the household multiple rounds to get such data. So one of the biggest challenges was to make sure that these students who are somewhat amateur, so they are trained in these data collection
mm,
techniques. The questionnaire and other things were all developed by my PI who was sitting in the Netherlands. So with some, because I was also quite new, but the field assistants had to be trained, and then they did an extremely good job in collecting data in the field. So what I would do is, I mean, I would be with them. I would also administer a couple of questionnaires by myself, and then I would make sure that the data is all proper and correct. And if there are any discrepancies, I would make sure that it is corrected in the field itself. We will go back or cross verify and so on. So the interesting thing which actually which occurred to me during that 1 year period is that the data that we were collecting were all good. So probably it would help us answer our academic question and also the main, the research question that we were posing. So eventually it would end up getting published in some journal and, it would be good. I mean, it might be, uh, it might throw in some surprises, but it might also be a standard work, but it would definitely be good, a good value addition to knowledge. But it was all using a particular lens and a particular set of methods. And when I was, talking to people in the field, I mean, what economists would call maybe loose conversations or chit chat.
mm,
So I saw that, I could actually get from them a lot more information, which would add extremely good context and depth, and for the to the data that we are collecting. But in terms of the methods that we were employing and also the approach that economics was taking, so there was no room to really include them. So, and until that point, for me, research methods would mean you have a economic model, so which would need data sets which have to be collected either by somebody else, which you would access or from different sources, or you would go to the field and then employ assistants and collect by yourself, and then do the analysis. And then, I mean, regression is the basic bread and butter of economists.
Mm.
So basically, you have a idea, then you have a mathematical model, so then you have statistics applied on it, and then you see whether that works or not. So that's how economists typically work, and this was no different. So even now,
Nice.
I have actually no, I mean, and that's an excellent method. But the thing is that when we look at some of these issues, I mean, I find that there are some limitations in such an approach. For instance, like I said, many of these conversations that I had with people couldn't be incorporated into such an analysis or such a paper. So then, at the end of 1 year, I became somewhat disillusioned because I thought if my idea in taking up this project, apart from getting a PhD or getting my own livelihoods, is to actually understand what is happening in the field and how to improve people's lives based on that. So then, probably this is not enough. And if the project is not really helping me do that, probably I would look for something else. So fortunately, and I made a critique of this project and then sent it to my PI and also my team. So fortunately, at that time, there was some administrative issues also in the project. And then the institute, my previous institute, which hosted me for my master's, I mean, they said, you can probably take this as your PhD research forward. So you have certain ideas. I mean, you are critical of how things are done. So just try it out and then let us see what eventually comes out of it. So my PhD research was actually looking at the exact same issue, but completely the other way around. So economists typically start with developing a model based on experts or their own ideas, and then they try to test it on the field. I mean, there is absolutely nothing wrong in it, but I mean, as long as you specify the caveats and limitations.
Mm. Mm.
But in my approach, what I was trying to do was to get the same ideas and data from the people themselves and then try to do a more bottom-up
Bottom up. Yeah.
approach. So which
This
would mean
is
that I compromise on the breadth of my sample. So because as a
mm.
single person, I would not be able to do a huge sample just like what I would do with assistants. But more importantly, I mean, I found that there is this field of social anthropology,
Mm.
which
Mm.
actually is a very, I mean, in terms of methods and approach, it's very opposite to economics. And oftentimes, these two groups actually fight with each other because economists think that anthropologists are storytellers, and anthropologists think that economists are ivory tower people. So, fortunately, when I was devising this project, at that time, a lot of debate was happening in, internationally in academia, trying, especially in development economics, trying to combine quantitative and qualitative methods in field-oriented research. So my PhD work, fortunately, it came at the right time. It spoke to this particular debate which was happening. So in fact, there is a whole lot of debate on what is called multidimensional poverty. So which means that you
Mm.
look at poverty not just in terms of one dimension, which is income, which is what economists do, which is more scientific. But you look at it in terms of multiple dimensions, also incorporating people's own ideas of, why they are considered to be poor or what should be the metric of poverty, rather than expert coming in and telling you, that money is the only metric of poverty. So this was the approach. So in fact, in 2010, UNDP had a new metric which was approved, which is now being reported in UN Human Development Report, which is a multidimensional poverty index. So this came as a result of concerted effort by many academics and many NGOs and researchers around the world for 10, 20 years. Small studies, large studies, and so on, everything culminating eventually into that large policy impact at that level. So coming back to my PhD work, so for the next 1 year, after my coursework and after my defending my proposal, I've spent my time in the field. So I did what is completely at that time not very common in economics, which is called focus group discussions.
Mm.
So which would mean you conduct your own discussions with people in groups, collect what is called qualitative information, which can't be quantified. And then I would also make observations. And in addition to that, I also did a household survey and I developed a set of indicators, multiple indicators, which would be relevant for people in that area, uh, to be able to be considered to be poor or not poor as a more in a more multidimensional fashion. So this was my part of my PhD research. In fact, at the end of the research, my work, I mean, this part of my work was selected as one of the 10 leading PhD work at that point globally working on poverty. because poverty research was getting a lot of attention at that time.
Mm.
So it was published in one of the major journals in the field. And in addition to that, I mean, fortunately, I also got an opportunity to present my findings in the at the Kerala State Planning Board at a workshop where they were discussing ways and means to improve the methods whereby BPL households are identified. Because the idea is that, I mean, earlier it was all based on income, and then so if you incorporate other dimensions which are also valuable, so then, I mean, you need to have a multiple, a different metric to look at BPL households or identify BPL households. So this was what my PhD research was. So, I mean, this has a lot of intellectual history also behind it. I mean,
Mm.
going back to Amartya Sen's capabilities approach and so on. So, in fact, Sen is also an economist, but then he is a reformed economist in the sense that, when he won Nobel Prize, it was not surprising given the volume of work that he has produced. But in terms of his orientation, he was not a standard mainstream economist. He was a
Mm.
different kind of an economist. So my inspiration came from, Amartya Sen and such people who work in development economics from a more what is called human development perspective, and also from people who work in participatory methods, who are mostly from a social anthropological approach. So in fact, by the time I finished my PhD, I mean, I could actually safely tell that my field is not development economics anymore, but it's what's called development studies.
Mm.
And it's an interdisciplinary field. And now, I mean, in India now we have several BA and MA programs in development studies.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
IIT Madras, for instance, has a master's in development studies, and TISS Mumbai has it. I mean, IIT Guwahati has it. So the difference between development economics and development studies is, in development economics you apply standard economic approaches or theories into the study of development issues. But in development studies, you are free to actually draw from a variety of methods and theories and tools,
Mm.
depending on where your home field is. I mean, you might be an anthropologist, you might be an economist, but you can still apply your skills. But then you also are not, it doesn't prevent you from collaborating or reaching out to people from other disciplines or mastering another discipline on your own. So ultimately, the orientation there in development studies is more of a problem-driven research rather than theory-driven research.
Mm.
So if you, in my bio or when I am asked to introduce myself to people, I always tell that I am a problem-driven
Problem driven. Yes, yes. Yeah.
because it's real life problems which actually led me to reorient my original work to such a topic in my PhD and also subsequently. So so
Wonderful,
this
wonderful.
this is how my PhD research ended. So after that, I
Yeah,
can
yeah, yeah.
but then probably uh,
Yeah, there are a few things I would want to just pick your brain on. One is that you can see that there's a very nice evolution of your thinking as you progress. You also are getting exposed to new methods and adding into your kitty and developing your own, expertise as you progress. But also simultaneously, you would be gravitating towards certain kind of questions, and the questions are very interesting because it actually needs a multidisciplinary approach, not just only from an economics, hardcore analytical economics viewpoint. So, which means that this exposure to slightly broader perspective, especially from this problem-driven approach. This is something I really liked it because as a physicist, that is our bread and butter, and that's something which actually we do a lot because we set up a problem and try to address it, or try to actually look at that particular question in various different viewpoints. Given that sociological and also political, economical situations are anchored in a society, the parameters actually are multiple. It's not very easy to actually attack such kind of problems, unlike, let's say, a physics problem where you can reduce or suppress certain kind of parameters in a very systematic way and do an experiment or develop a theory. How this thinking should be developed, Vijay? Because if an young person who is trying to get into this, who has a very strong inclination towards quantitative thinking, but wants to address problems in the society, development studies seems to be a very interesting pathway. given that you have this inclination and also expertise in problem solving approach to these kind of areas, it would be very beneficial for somebody who would want to get into it. So what would be your kind of advice to such people? What kind of training or what kind of thinking such a young person should actually undergo so that they would be able to set up themselves to address these kind of interesting questions?
So, I mean, I get this question also from students here and also from
Mm.
elsewhere. So, I mean, what I tell them is that my career trajectory has been a mix of accidents and then taking risks. So, every time when I found something which is interesting to me, I mean, fortunately, I mean, so apart from the first few years of my life where I was forced into, sciences for my 11th and 12th. So after that, I've actually taken a risk and I basically pursued whatever I liked. So even now, I mean, I just try to do what I like. The fortunate part is that whenever I had some idea, fortunately there were people to support me, and there was also funding in terms of research support. I mean, good grants and also good opportunities, and probably the topics which I naturally ended up. I mean, not deliberately. Naturally ended up were also topics which were discussed in academia very well during those periods. So probably in my case it was a mix of fortune and it was a mix of taking risks and also obviously putting in a good amount of hard work in understanding the other fields and so on. Right now, so there are quite a number of opportunities for young people to if you're really interested in such topics, to get into such areas. So, I mean, after my PhD, I went into environment and water. So that is another story which I will tell in a
Yeah,
bit.
we'll come to
But
that. We'll come to
yeah,
that. Yeah.
but so there are lots of different courses, especially at the master's level, which enable people to look at many of these applied and policy relevant issues. So, be it environmental management, be it climate change, be it water pollution, groundwater issues. So, and also classical problems like poverty and development, which we all have been grappling with and trying to solve for the last several years. So, there are dedicated master's programs and also certificate programs in many places. So I don't think at this point people can be really people need to be really unsure or trying to search for where to find opportunities or the ways forward. So but in terms of people wanting to pursue such things, I have a couple of caveats which I want to sound. So one is that there, I mean, my own career and training has been very interdisciplinary, is what I would
Mm.
actually say. I mean, I am trained as an economist, although I don't do much of economics nowadays. In the last 10, 15 years, I've not been doing standard, straightforward economics. So I've been working with a whole lot of people, including, say, hydrologists, environmental
Mm.
engineers, conservation biologists, and so on. So it's been very cross, collaborative and so on. And that is not always really easy. When you have to find a problem where you and others are naturally interested in, and the grouping and also the everything from the development of the idea, writing of the grant, doing work, publishing. So everything has to happen naturally. You also need to have your space. The other person also need to have his or her space. And then there are these problems where you can't really work on an issue like, say, water pollution, unless you have the institutions and the governance looked at, and the pollutants and also the contaminants. So you have to have an environmental engineer and a social scientist or a political scientist working together. So even as you work together, you should keep your identities in the respective domains. So
Mm.
nowadays there are several courses which enable people, uh, you know, which give people such training and prepare themselves for such career. But the caveat which I was trying to, sound is that people should still, I feel, have a home discipline,
Mm.
because at any given point, I mean, I can still teach basic economics, microeconomics, macroeconomics. I can still teach with some, maybe a month's preparation. I can teach a course in economics.
Mm.
Maybe
Mm.
I won't be able to do advanced courses. I would require some. I mean, development economics is a course which I can comfortably handle. But when I introduce to people who are not fully aware of my field, if you are from largely from my domain, I would introduce myself as somebody working in development studies or
Mm.
environment and development. So if you are somewhat alien, so then I would say I'm an economist primarily. So the question then they would ask is, so economist, I mean, so can you advise me on how the stock market is actually working? So that is something which I am completely clueless about. So the thing is, but still, in spite of that, I mean, I can confidently do off records or understand what economists do. But I think when we prepare students for very problem oriented or problem driven areas, especially in policy studies, so it is good to have a strong foundation or a concentration in one of the disciplines. I mean, economics or anthropology or sociology or or environmental science. So I mean, interdisciplinary thinking can happen once your discipline is actually somewhat the foundations are built. So then you are in a good position to maybe branch out and then step out and explore others. So this is one caveat which I would want to sound. So this is particularly important if you want to pursue a research career,
Mm.
because in research we tend to go into things in depth. So even when I say problem driven research, I mean it is eventually an academic work.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
academia would mean, I mean, you would have to make sure that you are on the top of literature, the current literature. So you are looking at problems which are really being discussed currently in the academia. So this could also be salient and community relevant problems or policy relevant problems. But it also has an academic angle to it. So a
Mm.
person who is aiming to pursue problem driven research in as an academic is it's a lot more challenging. So you have to be problem driven and policy driven and be academically rigorous at the same time. And especially if it requires collaboration between disciplines with others, so that is even more challenging. So it depends on your own comfort level, bandwidth, and also what you want to eventually do with your life and career. So which should drive you to take such decisions. But I mean, the good thing is that compared to say 20 years ago, there is lot more acceptance
Acceptance. Yeah, yeah.
to interdisciplinary work and also policy driven work. And many people who do such training at the master's level don't necessarily end up in academia. So they take career options in policy with policy think tanks and other organizations, and which are very good in itself. So this is you know um, so this is my response to that. So
Very nice. Yeah, that's an important thing. The very specific aspect what you mentioned about anchoring yourself in one particular discipline and getting to know it, in certain depth is so important. In fact, that is something which is sometimes lost when one is talking more about interdisciplinary research. Interdisciplinary research doesn't mean that you superficially go across the discipline. You actually really have the know-how and also, some expertise in certain things, and then you branch out, and that probably comes after a certain time, having spent some kind of some kind of time and also putting some effort in one particular discipline. I also kind of endorse that particular viewpoint. It's very important what you have mentioned, and yeah, that's something we also try to foster in the institution here. And I see there is a lot of interest among students to also look into these questions from a specific viewpoint, not just only from a natural science viewpoint, because ecology and environment is no more just only a question of
yeah.
biological sciences. It actually has now gone beyond that. It's become probably one of the most important problems in terms of climate, etc. So, segueing now to the further trajectory, Vijay, tell us a little bit about how you really got interested in the water question and your wonderful program and also the water research institution and also various different questions you have been addressing related to water, all the way up to the current situation where you have been actively involved in a lot of interesting questions and also programs related to water management. And then we'll probably ask the question which is a burning question about the Indus and Indus Treaty, and at least your thoughts on that particular thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I mean, at every point in my career, maybe until recently, I mean, I think once you become older and wiser, you tend to feel, you want to get settled. I mean, I don't think, I mean, we can ever settle in courts. but you are far less risk averse. I mean, so you are risk averse and you are far less risk taking. But that was not the case. That won't be the case in your in 20s and 30s. So after my
Mm.
PhD, what happened is, I was happy with what I've been doing, but on the other hand, I also wanted to explore things, more and better. So typically, what a poverty economist, I mean, so to speak, would say that do is that, I mean, so once every 2 or 3 years, when the new data set comes, you can actually sit and analyze and then look at the trends and so on. So which is a very valuable exercise in itself. But beyond a point that I thought that it's not really what I wanted to do. But I also was not completely sure as to what the next steps would be. But since I worked in this wetland region, I was gradually getting some interest in developing some interest in water and water management.
Mm.
So every field visit I take, I mean, people would mention about how the Vembanad backwaters is not managed properly, or the pollution which is happening, the number of houseboats there, and so on. So obviously, I didn't. I had only very amateurish and curiosity based interest in it, and I didn't have the proper training. And the organization which recruited me after my PhD, A3, it's a environmental research institution. So it has a unique structure in the sense that it has an academy which actually trains PhD students. Now they have a master's program as well.
Mm. Mm.
So where the emphasis is on the standard research approach, which is publishing and so on. But it also has a small teaching. At that point, it also had a small teaching component, which is primarily aimed at PhD students.
Mm.
And then, more importantly, compared to many organizations which actually restrict themselves to research and teaching, A3, since it worked on problem-driven areas, it also had active field sites where
Yeah.
researchers work. And the students who come for PhD would also look at topics which are of interdisciplinary in nature. For instance, you
Mm.
might join the PhD program as an ecologist, but then there would be a chapter or a paper in your dissertation where you would also look at the more social aspects of it. So you might join the program as an economist, but then you might also bring in some other aspect related to environment, which requires you to go into ecology or environmental science and so on, as part of your work. And at that point, for 4 or 5 years, the PhD program was also funded by Tata Trust. So which
Mm.
meant that, I mean, there was assured fellowship for 5 years for students, and it attracted a number of very bright young scholars who really wanted to do good work in broadly environment development and sustainability, who got into this program. But how I got into the institution is also interesting,
Mm.
because I knew people at A3 from before, through some contact. And it was not an option at that point for me to actually go in. So I was in two minds whether to stick on to the Netherlands or to take
Mm.
up a position in Bangalore, or somewhere in India, somewhere in South India. So, but my inclination was towards the latter, because I didn't see myself being away from the field in the immediate term. So I wanted a place where I can also do field-based work and continue my research the way it is. And if it has something to do with, say, environment and other things, I mean, that would be welcome, although that was not the primary interest. So I mean, since the opportunity at A3 came up, I joined. And then, fortunately, at that point, although I was initially not really planning to stay at A3 for a long time, at that point, soon after I joined, A3 had a restructuring, and all of us identified ourselves with programs. So, unlike
Mm.
typical discipline-oriented departments in universities like physics, economics, political science, mathematics, and so on. So there, the program groupings were based on problems and thematic areas where people have interest in. So since I've been interested in water, and then I can actually work well with maybe a hydrologist or an environmental scientist on water. So I identified myself with what was called the Land, Water, and Livelihoods program there.
Mm.
So there were three other programs as well. I mean, with focusing on broadly biodiversity, climate, ecology, and so on. So, and again, so this is another thing which I was telling. I mean, I tell students or people who approach me saying that, I mean, probably So my path is not something which can be, which is for them to replicate because I was fortunate.
Replicate.
So just as this restructuring happened, we also had some seed grant to work on some exploratory work. So there was no real expectation from the funds. So in the sense that, I mean, usually when you get a grant, you are bound by deliverables in terms of publications, workshops, presentations, and so on. But here we didn't have anything of that sort. It was basically a grant to enable us to build the program. And so then, along with a hydrologist colleague of mine, we selected two field sites. One, obviously, the field site which I was familiar with, which is Vembanad. The other is the Malaprabha Sub-basin region in northern Karnataka. So this
Mhm.
was my first, foray into an area which is outside of Kerala or outside of water-rich so-called
Mhm.
areas. So, and the area which we started studying was sugarcane dominated, so which you could see across Maharashtra and and northern Karnataka. So that was a quite an experience. I mean, so we had this project running for 1.5 years. So during that time, I learned water and hydrology and water management not through any training program. So this is the interesting thing because usually people get trained in water management or people get trained in economics. So I get trained in water management in the field.
Mhm.
A complete amateur who was working with a hydrologist, and he would. I mean, so we see things in the field. How sugarcane is a water-intensive crop. I mean, how reservoirs actually manage water, how flood control. So we had an interesting project where with a couple of young students who were interns, we worked on a project on the Krishna basin floods. I mean, the work happened a couple of years after the floods, but through that, I mean, I learned from this student, I mean, who was an intern, who is a civil engineering student from BITS Pilani. So he was interning with us, and later on he became a project associate. So he was teaching me civil engineering, maybe 101,
Mhm.
reservoir management, and so on.
Mhm.
And I would teach him, economics and governance and people and research methods in social sciences and so on. So similarly, a lot of cross fertilization happened in terms of learning, and there was no real hierarchy there. Everybody could learn from each other and from from the field. So in fact, I mean, the interesting thing is people in one of the panel discussions during some orientation program for the students, which was moderated by one of my colleagues. I mean, she asked the panelists, including me, so tell me about a few aha moments in your career. So I was thinking. I mean, obviously, I had several aha moments, but I mean, when I was reflecting on it, I found that I have more IO moments than aha. So this is what I told the group, and then I mean, the audience also had a similar reaction like what you had now. So in fact, I mean, I have made more blunders and more mistakes and more embarrassments in my research career and my professional life, and through all those embarrassments, I learned. And so water management, learning water management was also through several trial and error. But obviously, I had good mentors. I mean, Sharad Lele, who used to be an adjunct faculty also at
Mhm.
Henry.
Mhm.
So he was, although there was no postdoc mentor as such, I mean, he was one of the major influences in getting me into interdisciplinary socio-environmental research because he's a pioneer in terms of socio-environmental and interdisciplinary research. So in fact. So during my PhD, there were a couple of readings with from Sharad. I mean, which we were required to read. At that point, I didn't know him in person, but it was a privilege working with him during the initial part of my postdoctoral career and also much later. So we still collaborate. So and then other colleagues as well. So this is how I ended up getting into water management. And then the first 3 4 years, I mean, there was no real pressure on publications and as such. So we were basically evaluated based on whether we worked or not. So in fact, all of us learned, and we also, I mean, I wrote several grants, many of which, I mean, in collaboration with others, obviously, but many of which actually didn't succeed. But eventually, by 2012, 2013, we got a couple of large grants from, IDRC Canada, Tata Trust, and, one from DST as well. So this enabled us to develop a huge program on water management in and around Bangalore and its the villages around Bangalore and also Bangalore city. So this work started happening around 2011-12. So this is also again very interesting. So the initial proposal that we had submitted to Tata Trust had an orientation towards political economy of agrarian change. So this is a standard question that development economists, ask. So how do agriculture transform in, especially in peri-urban areas, over a longer period? Because you have, all this push factor from the city, and you might eventually abandon agriculture. And then what does that have in terms of implications for people's livelihoods, crops, crop choices, and so on? But when we were touring around that area, since you are also from Bangalore,
Mm.
you might probably know, so once you go past Kenkeri and enter into Mysore Road, so there is this area called Bairamangala.
Bare money. Yeah.
There's a reservoir. And so this was also part of our field study. In fact, I mean, if you look at my webpage, there is a documentary which we have made towards the end of our research there on wastewater use in agriculture.
Yes, yes, yes.
So,
I'll be anyway linking the web page
yeah.
so listeners and viewers can visit that page. Yeah.
Sure, sure. So, in
Mm.
fact, once I started again field visit in that area, I found that, oh, probably we should actually be looking at the question of wastewater reuse in
Mm.
the region, because that is what is important for agriculture in the region as well, and not really the question of the very academic question of agrarian change and farmers' livelihoods and so on, which has been quite standard. So that, I mean, fortunately, our donors, I mean, again, here is again luck comes as a factor. Our donors also agreed to the change in question and the change in the orientation of the project. So that project happened in that part of that set of villages. So in addition to that, I had a larger project on the upper part of what is called the Arkavati Basin, so which is a tributary of Kaveri. So this Arkavati Basin, or the reservoir there, TG Halli Reservoir, used to provide water to Bangalore before Bangalore started relying on Kaveri supply. So the last 10 or 20 years, this river has gone completely dry. So this was a question which our team looked into. So in fact, when I said when I talk about this project, so this project had four of us as PIs and
Mhm.
some 50 researchers, from postdoctoral fellows to fresh engineers to field assistants during different parts of that project working with us. So it was a huge team effort. So in fact, the beauty of the project is that I was working on the farm part where you look at how agricultural crop choice is made and how farmers respond to water stress and so on. The hydrology team would actually do the measurements in the field and then look at the same issue from a more hydrology and groundwater perspective. So we didn't have a climate team as such, but then we also did some basic climate analysis, looking at the long-term changes in temperature and precipitation, and whether that had an impact on the river going dry. But so in fact, if you go from Bangalore to Nandi Hills, so you would see that there are so the you see a lot of empty or dry keres or canals,
Yeah,
lakes,
yeah.
and
All old memories. I hardly visit Bangalore, but yeah, that's true.
So,
Yeah,
so and if you go further to Nandi Hills, I mean, so that is where this sub-basin actually originates.
yeah, yeah.
So typically, when in water management, we look at basin or sub-basin as a scale, or catchment as a unit of analysis. I mean, this is again a departure from what I'm used to in social sciences, because in social sciences, when you go to the field, you look at villages or districts or state as the unit, because these are the administrative units. But here you are looking at a biophysical unit, which is the catchment, the watershed,
Mm.
the sub-basin, basin, and so on. So we were looking at this Arkavati basin. And so the basin had a system of cascading set of tanks. So where rain falls and then the first tank fills, then the second tank fills, and so
Mm.
on. And then it flows downstream. So for the last couple of decades, the tanks have not been filling. So if you tour around the area, you could easily find that you can easily find how this happened. So you would spot a number of bore wells,
Mm.
and the northern part, you would also spot a lot of eucalyptus plantations. So you know that both of these are water intensive mechanisms, water intensive plantations, and also technology. So in fact, our study tried to look at this to try to find a empirical verification of this processes from the more biophysical and social aspects. I can't I won't go into the details, but then the learning is that it was a fascinating group effort, which eventually resulted in a lot of policy influence at the local level, ground level, a lot of learnings, academically speaking, in terms of larger scale learnings which are published in journals and so on, and also a lot of quite a bit of outreach in terms of the usual presentations and meetings, and also
Mm.
through documentaries and other things which usually people don't do. So again, the luck factor also played a role because we had enough funding to do the work. We had good people to work with, and everything worked perfectly well. So side by side, I've also been teaching at A3. At
Mm.
A3, I've been teaching every other year. So we are unlike every year. So the PhD intake would happen every other year, which means that we have 1.5 years of teaching. But the classes could easily be shifted because we are dealing with only some 12 or 14 students,
Mm.
PhD level students at most. So unlike the 70 or 80 strong class which I see in my,
Mm.
so this is how that phase of my life actually went. Uh, so
Wonderful.
so I mean, on teaching, I mean, I actually really enjoy teaching. So
And I should mention that Vijay was actually also, awarded as the best teacher this time in ISET Pune. In fact, this was a recent accolade. He got it. Congrats, Vijay. And because there's a lot of interest among students to gravitate towards these areas too. That's an important point, actually. Yeah, yeah.
So in fact, I offer three electives at ISER Pune. One is
Mm.
economics and public policy, which is a standard economics course, but I try to make it a bit more problem driven because I use a different curriculum, which is called core, which is now
Mm.
taught in many other universities around the
Mm.
world. It's an open access curriculum, so people can access the material. And although it doesn't compromise on the fundamental principles of economics, it actually takes a much more real world approach to problems. And instead of making it too abstract, the theory is still abstract, but it brings the more political and social problems and
Mm.
environmental problems also in the curriculum, so that economics feels more real life rather than like physics, for instance. I mean, which standard economics curriculum actually gives you. The
Mm.
other two electives which I offer, development studies and also climate adaptation, are basically my own biographies or autobiography,
Mm.
my research career. So in development studies, I start with the income approach or the economic
Mm.
approach to measurement of development and poverty. And I end up with the more environmental and socio-environmental approach.
Social.
So which is again based on textbooks and accepted curriculum.
Mm.
But I have the liberty also to draw from my own field experience and also projects in that. In the climate adaptation course, again, I mean, I've been using my own case studies from the past, especially this
Mm.
Arkavati study and also other studies that I've been involved in. So that way, I hope, I mean, at ISER, since it is a research-driven institution, and teaching is very much driven by your research and not
Yeah,
really
yeah.
isolated. That actually gives quite a bit of flexibility and
Mm.
excitement in terms of bringing in your own research, whether it is past or ongoing, into the classroom, and then discussing that with interested students. So that has been something which is encouraging, which I really like.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, that is also something which I really like because something the exposition also can become very contemporary in that sense because then you can anchor your questions and concepts in problems which actually have not been solved yet, and therefore the students would get exposure to important questions which they themselves can approach and try to address as part of their career. So, over a broad context, the problem of water management. What are the important questions in the field, Vijay? Could you just give us a little bit of kind of overview of that, and then we will, of course, look into something, a kind of a burning question, which I have. At least I want to understand a little bit more about this the aspects related to Indus Treaty, etc. But before that, just a broad questions related to water management, both in urban and also in ecological context. Yeah.
So, in fact, if currently, I mean, I work on three broad ideas. I mean, all of this is can be extended to my past research and
Mm,
you know investigations. So, something which I've been interested for a long term is the issue of metrics itself. So, how do we measure development and poverty in its comprehensive form? Over time, I've moved from standard approaches to composite indices.
mm,
Human Development Index, which everybody is familiar with, is a composite index. And currently there is a lot of interest at the more global and macro level in terms of developing new indices which can capture the social and environmental dimensions because climate change and other issues are becoming more prominent now. So, but what could be a good metric to capture it? So, other than say GDP or HDI.
mm,
So this is one something which is, I mean, this is basically coming from my research from my master's time onwards. So I've been keeping that research quite alive, and after I moved to IISER Pune, I've not been very closely involved in the field.
mm,
And especially after COVID, I started, zooming out a bit, looking at more, scaled up a bit and
mm,
looking at more macro level problems and not really on the field problems. Although I had a field project which just concluded this December. I had an NGO collaborator, Sopecom in Pune, who did most of the field-based activities. And also, they're also intellectually very grounded in water management and natural resource management issues. The second aspect which I work on is climate action. Again, so this is only on the adaptation side because when we look at climate change, so there are three aspects in which climate change is looked at. One is the climate science itself,
mm,
which I borrow from, but I don't have expertise in climate science. The other is mitigation, which many economists work on and many energy specialists work on. So again, my interest is not so much on mitigation, but my interest is on adaptation. So adaptation looks at past and present, and then it tries to look at how people respond to changes and so on. So there, I bring in water as a core element as well because my work has been in the water domain. But the work in climate doesn't always necessarily restrict itself to water. So it's broadly adaptation in its multiple forms. Coming to water, the major problem, I mean, which I'm sure many people in the water sector would also agree, is that it's not so much about the availability of the resource.
mm,
It's about inequitable distribution of the resource and such justice issues and so on. So, but when we talk about justice and equity and such issues, these are all loaded terms,
mm,
right? I mean, but at my own interest was to, or effort has always been not to actually make it very political in that sense, although it is inherently very political. So you have to then, try to find out ways and means to actually improve the situation.
mm.
So one of the classic cases is water, since it is a peculiar resource, unlike say air or other resources, it flows through a gradient, and you have to actually arrest the flow of water to be able to use it. So
Yeah.
there is always this upstream downstream linkages and dynamics which is happening in the case of water management. So all the basin level management plans and the big disputes that we see in water management, say between Karnataka, which is sitting upstream, and Tamil
Mm.
Nadu, which is sitting downstream, or now between say India and Pakistan
Pakistan, yes,
in this
yes.
issue. So all of this have to do with this upstream downstream linkages and also dependencies. So, I mean, here again, we are talking again in terms of broad, thinking. There is a bit of abstraction here. But when you look at the actual measurement, also actual metrics in terms of, water availability and so on, there are plenty of things which people have done and also what the government is doing. So one of the metrics which the government is using is the liters per capita per day metric, which is
Mm,
a LPCD, which is what is called LPCD. So in rural areas, the people are expected to receive at least now 70 LPCD, 70 liters per capita per day. So that's the norm which has been set by the government or which the government strives to achieve. So over and above that is actually not really luxurious use, but I mean which is it is good if you have more than that. But what you see in many cities and also many areas is that there is huge variation between LPCD in terms of access to water between different locations and also different communities. So just to take the example of Bangalore city, so people who live in say Sadashiv Nagar might actually be using maybe 600 or 700 LPCD. I'm just putting a number there.
Mm.
There are also studies on those lines. But people who live in maybe slum areas in the city might actually be accessing only say 20 or 30 liters per capita per day. So even when we look at water management, it is a matter of actually, all this value promises or value-based thinking that we have in our mind, or political thinking that we have in our mind. So which what I would call the normative aspects of water management is something which have to be actually taken into account. So water management is not something which has to do with efficiency. So, I mean, efficiency is about loss. I mean, preventing loss, or bringing in cost effectiveness in the supply of water. So that is just one concern. I mean, that is mostly a concern by economists and engineers. But there is
Mhm.
also a social and institutional dimension in water management. So those are also, not really, loose statements. But
Mm.
this can also be tracked. I mean, there could also be quantitative methods and also metrics applied to them. So this is where part of my attention has been. As far as domestic water supply is concerned.
Mm.
So in terms of water management, I mean, you typically view the division of sectors into four. One is domestic, the second is agriculture, the third is industry, and the fourth, which people oftentimes don't look at, is the issue of environment or
Environment.
the flows,
Mm.
because there should be something left for the aquatic biodiversity and also nature to.
Yeah, probably more important in a
More,
way.
more importantly, I mean, so you see some statements like, we should not let any water flow down because we
Mm.
should harness as much water as we can in our village. Because that's a flawed thinking, because then you are depriving downstream users of their due. You are
Mm.
also depriving nature of its natural flow. Because eventually, I mean, ultimately, you are dealing with a natural flow, which is a water cycle,
Mm.
which you study in school. So that is what we are relying. I mean, so that's the entire system under which we are working. So in the case of water management, unlike many other social problems, since it has strong linkages with the environment, we start with this resource first and then put people there, and then you have to
Mm.
manage it. So efficiency is a core concern, but also important is the issue of equitable water distribution between upstream and downstream users, and also between different users in the same domain, and also good and efficient use in, say, agriculture and so on. So one example, if I can quickly give. So
Yeah, yeah.
during study in Arkavati Basin, we found that it's a water scarce region. And in spite of water scarcity, we found that many people are not really putting in water conservation measures. So, like for instance, drip irrigation is a water conservation measure which government actually actively supports. So we studied around 1,000 villages. I mean, it's not a small area. So we had numerous, so-called qualitative observations from the different villages. We also had a large household survey of farmers, and also a crop choice analysis of, in-depth crop choice analysis of farmers. So the regression analysis and then the standard analysis actually showed not so surprising results. But what was interesting was that people didn't really opt for water conservation measures in spite of facing huge water scarcity. So this kind of puzzled me, and also my team members and others. So in fact, when we read more, we found that this is not an isolated phenomenon. In fact, all over India, so there has been much less uptake of say micro irrigation and water conservation technologies compared to what it eventually what was envisaged. So we did a review of literature, a systematic review during COVID on this aspect, and we found that there is quite a bit of interesting insights from standard agronomic and agriculture sciences, and also
Mhm.
anthropological studies on why people don't really do this. So there are a couple of explanations for this. One is that if you are in a water scarce region, and if you are say facing uh, if you are requiring to put in water efficient technologies, so
Mm.
as a farmer, you might actually be interested in looking at your livelihoods. I mean, getting
Mm.
more income out of your crops. So if the usual tendency would be one, what you could roughly call the Jevons paradox, or the efficiency issue, where you tend to cultivate more area when you have more water. I mean, you don't actually save water, but instead you use the same water to expand your area under irrigation. So this is one problem. The other which we found in Bangalore is that basically people are waiting for agriculture to the water to dry up and maybe quit agriculture in the long run. Because if
Mm.
you look at all the different ways in which routes in which real estate has been expanding, Nelmangara, Ramnagara, all those different directions. So farmers are eventually, I mean, gradually quitting farming, and then probably this would all be taken up by real estate interests, and also maybe it would eventually become built up. So, so you have to actually look at many of these policies from a more farmer-oriented perspective,
Mm.
rather than thinking in terms of what works in probably in a lab setting in the or a field setting in the agriculture university. For instance, you have far better and efficient technologies which are developed in the agriculture universities in terms of the gadgets and apparatus or instruments. But once you actually put that in the, to the bring that to the farmer in the field, you oftentimes see that it actually falters or fails, or there is no real uptake. So this social institutional aspects needs to be taken into account when we implement such technology. So this has been one of my learnings from the field, and also from what I could actually find in literature broadly. So broadly, I mean, what I was telling was that, I mean, domestic water use and agriculture water use. So
Mm.
these have been my broad areas
Broad
of
areas.
water management. So I've not looked at in much detail on industrial water management.
Mm.
Industry, in the whole scheme of things, only takes up a small proportion of the
Small proportion, yeah.
and environmental flows. I have not been looked at. I have not looked at that aspect much.
So, what's your take on the abeyance of the treaty? It's going to be very straightforward? Of course, there are many details. I'm just seeking your kind of thoughts on that, kind of very broadly. An abeyance would actually lead to something, because come monsoon, there will be also a lot of flow of water. Whether we have enough capacity to store it, and as per the abeyance.
No, so I think, I mean, first of all, I haven't actually, I mean, so when I comment on this, so it should also be backed by my own
Yeah, yeah.
studies, and also, my own reading and evidence related to the area. So I haven't actually worked on this area at all.
Mm,
What I have, the knowledge that I have is from the reading and also the debates
mm,
which I've been following. So yeah, and the caveat again is that whatever we tell on such issues will be political. So because that
yeah.
that is also the other implication of that. But I think in terms of moving forward, and also in terms of the immediate implications, so there were a couple of articles which came out in popular media recently. One by Himanshu Thakur, I mean, who is
Mm,
a leading water expert,
mm.
which I would encourage everybody to read, which is a more nuanced perspective on how this is. I mean, nobody actually disagrees with the political and other aspects of the problem, but in terms of using this as a mechanism to maybe prevent water flows from our upstream region to downstream regions, there are practical and infrastructural limitations.
Invitations.
So, for the immediate term, you can actually think of this as a very symbolic move,
Mm,
where you have made a political position and you have made a political statement that if we are pushed really to the you know um, to the extreme,
extreme, yeah.
even natural resources could be used as a weapon, because we have no other
Mm,
option, because that has been the position of India on this issue.
mm,
But on the other hand, in terms of practical application of this particular position, you are limited by, first of all, the infrastructure in terms of reservoirs and storage structures, and also in terms of the use to which this can actually be diverted. So whether there is enough, agricultural and other requirements of such water, because this requires long-term planning.
mm,
And the other implication, if at all this happens, so now I don't think the treaty is now going to come back soon. So that is the if the current situation continues, and if we start building infrastructure upstream, and be if we are able to store more water, So one of the other things which we should actually be worrying about should also be about glacier melt and
Mm,
long-term climate change, and then what implication would it have on the water resources in the basin. So all those risk assessments should also be undertaken before we think of implementing anything. Anyway,
right.
it's not going to happen overnight. So we have plenty of time, not even months, but years to actually,
Mm,
reflect on this and then put in measures. So this will require a multi-pronged effect in terms of first, like I said, infrastructure. Second, in terms of land use changes and so on, and then providing incentives for people to maybe move to new crops or shift their
mm,
current patterns and so on. And finally, more importantly, we also need to have a 50, 100-year vision in terms
mm,
of what could be the long-term climate impact in this region. So there, climate science can actually help us maybe plan better for future. So although the more medium and short-term measures would mostly come from policy and more agricultural experts and so on,
experts.
there should also be long-term vision, especially in the wake of all these dynamic changes that we see in terms of climate in the region. So this is my take on this, a rather dry scientific take.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very important way of thinking. In fact, this is something which is more necessary than other ways of really looking at it. And thank you for that particular insight. In fact, that's so vital for us to also think about it. So we're almost concluding, Vijay. So give us an overview of the questions you are set to kind of address going forward. What is the kind of programs you have in your mind, and what are the ideas you would want to explore going forward?
Yeah, so currently, I mean, like I said, so I think I've worked for several years in the field, and I think probably this is a time to maybe reflect and scale up a bit. So I'm trying to go back to my roots and then, revive some of the old, ideas.
Mm, mm,
So this is where this idea of metrics and then how can we really
mm,
conceptualize development and well-being. So what could be a good metric or a appropriate metric to convey this to practitioners and policymakers, especially taking into account the environmental challenge in addition to the social. Because as social scientists, for example, even if you take the case of say the Human Development Index, which is very widely
mm,
used, it looks at only very social indicators, I mean, education, income, and health. So there is really no room for environment there in terms of its conceptual orientation, nor in terms of its index formulation,
mm,
or in terms of the data that we are looking at. So in fact, there is some change, I mean, which you see in global policy and also among researchers now to bring in a more socio-environmental perspective on such issues, bringing up
mm,
more
mm,
new composite indices which can also account for the environmental factor. So this is one area which I am, interested in. So this also has implications on, the we attaining the sustainable development goals, and
mm.
so many policy aspects are related to this question. And I was also part of the IPCC
Yes.
6 working group 2 report. So that actually gave me some ideas to take this work forward. So in terms of water management, again, I'm thinking of looking at more policy aspects. Um, Given my experience from the field and also my insights from the work so far. So one of it I already mentioned about water efficient technologies and why in India there has not been so much uptake of water efficient technologies in spite of government pushing it and in spite of we facing water scarcity in several agriculture regions. So these are some of the issues that I'm thinking of working on, or currently my work is along those lines. And I do collaborate with people who work in the field and also
Mm,
NGOs and researchers. And the other thing, again, one of my interests and in moving out of A3 and taking a more stable in quotes university position is also that I'm really interested in teaching and then
mm, yeah.
bringing that theory and practice in terms of electives which I can offer. So, teaching also makes you think and reflect
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
we,
absolutely.
it's a two-way process. Sometimes after the class, I mean, our students are smart and sometimes they ask really good questions. So they may not like it, but then that keeps us thinking, and we keep thinking about such questions. And I find, even if you have some three or four good students in the class, and if they keep asking questions and then prick your brain, so that's a very intellectually stimulating experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, that really adds a lot of value to what we do because it not only, it's not a one-way traffic. It's actually both ways. There is exchange of ideas, and there are so many interesting exchanges which happen not just only during formal, classroom discussions, but also beyond that. And I'm very glad. In fact, the Humanities and Social Sciences unit at department at ISA Pune has been actually at the forefront of many interesting questions. And Bijay's research has been one of the key elements of that particular department. So, Vijay, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful, an hour with you, more than an hour. I've learned a lot, and I'm very sure a lot of listeners and viewers will also benefit from the thoughts you have imparted and also shared with us, and also laid a very interesting framework for people who would want to get into quantitative thinking. Also, with an eye on the socially relevant problems, which have immediate effect for our society at large. It's not just only confined to one particular region or to the level of the country, and sometimes even beyond the geography where one is localized. So thank you very much for this wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Bhavan, for the opportunity. I think we overshot the time. I
No,
think
no, no. There's
whatever.
no it's only a kind of a lower limit. There is no upper limit per se. There's absolutely no problem. In fact,
So
it's my pleasure.
I really enjoyed the conversation, and it was a pleasure being on your podcast, and a privilege too. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
it's my pleasure and privilege, I should mention. So this is Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. This time with the one and the only Bejoy Thomas. Thank you, Bejoy.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.